700, ACT 300, SA 1400. So the top two will be Victoria and New South Wales. So I think, and just a little bit on who we are. At Education Malaysia Australia, our director, Mr. Khalil Zayani, myself as the Education Attaché, Ustad Muzaffar, another Education Attaché based in Sydney, and we have in Mr. Abdul Hadi, Education Attaché that is based in Perth. So I will look after welfare of students in New South Wales and ACT. Encik Muzaffar will look after welfare of students in Victoria, and Encik Hadi will look after Perth and Southern Australia part.
So just going off the welfare part, can the EMA act as an emergency contact for students?
Oh yes. You can use our contact as your emergency contact. I will just put it here. Our email is contact @ema.org.au, and also you can get the information from our website www.ema.org.au, and our contact number is 61293277565. Or you can visit our Facebook. Our Facebook is Education Malaysia Australia, or our Instagram Education Malaysia Australia.
Cool, thank you so much.
Welcome.
So I think that just wraps up our session with the EMA. Thank you for coming and attending.
Thank you, Ellen.
So
thank you so much, and hope to see everyone soon.
Thank you. So for our next visit, thank you, Ms.
All right, thank you.
For our next organization joining us, it will be Uni OK, and this is Reese representing Uni OK. So,
hello.
Reese, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Could you just explain to the audience, like, what does Uni OK do?
Yeah, sure. So we're a company which provides welcoming and settling in services for international students. The first part is we want to touch base with international students and their families, and open up a dialogue to enable them to be asking us questions about what to expect when they come here, and to generally give them some peace of mind. Second, we aim at providing them with a welcome service at the airport. We try and take the stress out of that by arranging for collection and providing you with some basic things that you need to get set up in Australia. Small things, but things that take away from the stress of moving to a new country. Third, we aim at providing settling in services in respect of the basic things that you need, like some life admin. So we have a settling in tour where we basically take the students around and get them set up with bank accounts, tax file numbers, IDs, and the like which they need.
Cool. So could you tell me a bit more about, could you give a bit of advice for students about accommodation and what kind of services they can use to find accommodation?
Yeah, so accommodation's a tough one because you're leaving your home, you're coming here, it's a new country, you may have friends here, you might not, you may have family here, you might not. So it's very important to sit down and think about what you need in your accommodation as opposed to what you may want. So for instance, you want to have a look at things like how close is the accommodation to your university? What type of accommodation is it? Is it run by an organisation like your campus? or are you after something like a private rental, or is it a share house? So these are things that you need to sit down and decide before you come, because when you come to Sydney, has a fairly competitive rental market. So even for locals, it takes a number of weeks to actually find an appropriate rental. So my advice is sit down, think about how far you are away from the campus, because that of course will impact on your travel expenses each day, which might not be much if it's only $7 a day, but $7 a day might add up on your student budget. So have a look around the suburbs which are close to your campus, and also close to other amenities like the trains or the buses which you'll need to get around Sydney.
Thank you. So what if the students run into any problems with their accommodation? Who can they contact? Where can they go?
It's a great question. It's a good question. It depends on what type of accommodation. If you're on campus, then the obvious answer is to go to the people who run that particular accommodation. Most colleges will have a student infrastructure which will enable you to have an easy point of first contact. So if you have an issue with someone else who's living in your accommodation, or something's happened and you need some help, you can go to those people on the campus who live in the same place that you do. That's the great benefit of campus accommodation. You have a network of people around, and you also get the benefit of the support services that those organisations provide. If you're out on your own or in a share house, that makes it a bit more difficult. So it depends on what the problem is. So if the problem is in respect of, say, your annoying housemate, well, that might be something that you have to deal with the annoying housemate up front, or you may have to find some accommodation if things aren't alternate accommodation if things aren't going well. In Australia, it's helpful to sign a lease. There are some share house arrangements where some person will have the lease in their name, and they really have all the control and the power, because you have no real legal rights against them as a subtenant. But I'm not providing legal advice, I'm just speaking generally. And so I would say that if you have a lease and you get into trouble in respect of rental issues, or the landlord isn't doing the right thing that they should be with the lease, then we have an organisation called NCAT, which is the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and that's where rental issues and the like are dealt with. So you can go there and represent yourself. That's what it's set up for.
Thank you. So is there any extra advice that you would like to give to students about their accommodation?
Look, you're leaving home, so it's going to be a bit hit and miss. What I mean by that is it may go well, there might be times when it's not well, but it's going to be an adventure and it's a great time. So it's exciting, but just plan it ahead and be smart and and hope that things go well. Generally, Australia's generally quite a safe place, but you can find yourself in a bit of a bind, or that will cost you money if you don't have your accommodation sorted, because short-term accommodation is expensive.
Yes.
And that's about it. So I'd just say plan and be smart.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I just wanted to let our viewers know that if you had any questions regarding anything that our guest speakers have said or talked about, then just either message the MASCA page, or you can just comment on the live stream and we'll answer it on the spot. Okay. So just one more thing about accommodation.
Sure.
what kind of apps or websites can you use to find accommodation?
Oh, okay. So you can use, again, it depends on what you're looking for. So if you're looking for some short-term accommodation, you can always go for the Airbnb. Airbnb, do they have Airbnb in Malaysia? Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Okay, good. All right, good. You can use Airbnb, which is helpful if you do find yourself just after some short-term accommodation, but it's not really a long-term option. You can also look at apps like domain.com.au that have rentals advertised. You can also look at, I haven't rented in such a long time, there's Housemates. It's housemates.com.au where people advertise for people to go into share housing. And that's really it in terms of the internet. I mean, there's any other questions on accommodation or?
No, I think that's all we have for now. Yeah.
Excellent.
If there's any questions that the viewers will ask, then
Sure.
I'll ask you that later. So moving on to another subject, mental health. What kind of support is there for students facing mental health issues in Australia?
I think it's worth saying before I make a comment on the services that in Australia there's been a very big push to destigmatise mental health issues. And what I mean by destigmatise is to take the shame away from talking about them and being open about problems that you might be having, because we're only human, and some international students, of course, if they come over here, they're under a lot more stress than what they might be used to initially, and it's only natural that you might get issues with anxiety, or you're away from home for the first time, so you might get a bit sad, and sometimes that sadness might stick around and that might lead into a bit of depression. So I think it's important that everyone knows that Australia is a place where you can be open and you can talk about this stuff without shame, and you can seek help. So I think that's an important first comment to make. In respect of services, most universities that you go to have a fairly thorough suite of services for students. That includes counsellors, and it also includes doctors who can refer you off to mental health professionals if your mental health requires a little bit more than just counselling. And that's okay, but that would be the first step. The second step, we also have organisations such as Lifeline, which is basically an organisation which is free, and there's a number, and if you need to talk to someone, you can just call them up and talk.
Thank you. And are there any other online services that you could go to besides from Lifeline?
Yeah, you can go to, there's one fairly prominent one which is called Beyond Blue. There's also an organisation called Headspace. These are organisations which are geared at helping people get through their mental health issues, whether they be short-term or long-term.
Okay, thank you. So we actually do have a question about accommodation.
Oh, excellent.
So one of our viewers asked, should they stay on campus or out of campus for their first year in Australia?
Look, I'm very biased. I stayed in, when I was at uni, I left home, moved to a different town. I was on campus for about 4 years. I loved it, thought it was great, but at the same time it's not for everyone. So I can say the benefits of it are that you don't have these issues that you do have with having to find a place, having to come over here, or perhaps even try and rent a place when you haven't seen it yet if you're trying to lock it in before you leave, which is not advisable, by the way. It gives you a support network of people who are in college with you as well, and those experiences can be quite good, and it can enable you to basically find your feet and in Sydney, which can be a bit overwhelming for some people. So I think I'm all for campus accommodation for people in their first year, but that being said, it's not for everyone. So if you go there on my recommendation and it's not for you, I'm really sorry.
Thank you for that. So for our viewers, our individual MSOs will talk about the specific unis later on in our webinar, so just stay tuned for that.
Oh, it's also worth saying, if I can just go back to the campus, a lot of the campuses, but not all, but a lot of campuses also have food included.
Yes, that's
so,
right.
Which is very important. So you don't have to go out and spend money on restaurants. You can find accommodation where your food is included, which in your first year, that's fantastic.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the topic of banks. What should you look out for when you are choosing a bank?
Look, most banks in Australia have great student account schemes where there's zero fees. Unfortunately, there's also zero interest. So if you want to make some money, and if you're in the fortunate position where you do have some money here and you want to earn some interest, probably the student account wouldn't be the one to go for. Yeah, there's not much earning on a bank account, which only has 0.001% interest. But there's a great little website called www.finder.com.au, and that has, if you type in student bank accounts for international students, it comes up with a whole list of various bank accounts, what they offer, what they don't, and that's a very helpful tool for you to engage in. You also want to think about whether you're using it for a high level of transactions. So you want a bank account and a card, presumably, that enables you to have a high rate of transactions, because students don't always have a lot of cash on them. So they will be going around paying for things on their card, on their FPOS, and you don't want to be stung. So you want one which is unrestricted on the number of transactions.
So are there any other types of bank accounts that students can open other than student bank accounts?
Sure. They can open, if they've got the appropriate credentials and the bank is happy to extend them a credit account, they can do that. You'd probably have to have some guarantees offered by your parents, being students, for that, unless you have a property in your name or something that the bank knows that they can use as security in the event that there's a default. But generally speaking, you want the student account if you have money, which most students don't, then you're not really looking beyond a student account or a credit account.
Thank you. What is the process for opening a bank account in Australia?
So you can do it one of two ways. You can go online or you can go in. Essentially, as an international student, what you're going to need is your confirmation, is your offer from your university. You're going to need some form of proof that you've accepted that offer. You're going to need your passport, and there may well be several other ID documents that they ask for, and most times you're going to have an address for them.
So is opening a bank account something that can be done very quickly, or is it a very long process?
No, it's very quick. If you have the required identification, if you walk into a bank, they'll be more than happy to open up an account and take your money.
Thank you for that. Did you have any other advice that you wanted to, or anything else you wanted to talk about relating to banks?
Interestingly, Australia Post, which is our post office network, offer banking services as well. So not many people know this, but if you're away, say in a small town, and your particular bank isn't in that town, you can go into Australia Post, and if your bank is a participant with the Australia Post, you can do transactions via the Australia Post staff there.
Will that incur an extra fee?
It's a good question. I don't know.
For ATMs, if you have a bank account with one bank, can you use an ATM for another bank without incurring an extra fee?
My experience personally is only if that bank has a deal with that other bank.
Okay.
Otherwise, you do get hit with transaction fees for using other bank accounts,
So
ATM machines. So my advice is, if you come here and you're using your card everywhere at different ATMs, and then you get a shock when you realise that they've taken a whole bunch of money out at the end of the month or whenever it occurs, that's why. So if you'd like to avoid that, then just use the ATMs for your card.
Would you recommend that students attain a photo ID for opening up a bank account, or just any other aspects of their life?
I would. We recommend going to the RMS in New South Wales, who issue...
What was the RMS stand for?
RMS is the organisation which governs basically driver's licences and boating licences. So in the context of what we're talking about, so if you want a driver's licence, you have to go to the RMS to get one as an Australian. They also issue ID cards, just a generic ID card, which I think is important for students to have, so they don't find themselves walking around with their passport. Because some places, if you want to go out to, say, a pub or a restaurant in a pub, then you're going to need your ID, which is not ideal if you're out at night. You don't want to be carrying your passport around. So I would highly recommend getting an ID from the RMS.
Is it necessary to get both a license and an ID, or is just the ID enough?
No, you can get a license if you like, and you can go down that line. But I think an ID is enough if you're not going to drive.
Okay, thank you. So, and there are many apps and platforms available for public transport in Sydney. Could you just go over the main ones and some pros and cons of each?
Yeah, sure. So there are some apps. There's about 9 or 10 for New South Wales. So I'm not going to go through them all, but there are some apps that specialise in telling you which transport has services for disabled people, which is helpful and important. And there are mainly what they do on a whole. The apps just tell you the schedules. Some tell you if the trains or the buses or the ferries are running late, so on and so forth. My recommendation is TripView. TripView is, as I understand it, the most popular app in New South Wales. It may even be run by the New South Wales state government. It might be their thing. So I find it pretty reliable. I use it myself.
What kind of features does TripView provide? So
TripView, if you want to, say, go somewhere in Sydney, which is important if you're an international student, you can type in where you are, and you can then say, I want to go here. And then it will tell you the various routes you can go and the various services you can use to get there. So for instance, it might be, okay, I'm at this place and I want to get to, say, a different suburb. So you type it in and it will say, walk 400 metres to this bus stop, hop on this bus, and then that might take you straight there, it might not. and then it'll say jump off at this stop or hop onto this train, and then hop off at that stop and then walk. So it's actually quite helpful, especially if you're new to Sydney. I didn't grow up in Sydney myself, so when I moved here, getting an app like that was really good because it helped me navigate around. So for me, I say TripView.
I think that the app that you just described is Google Transport rather than TripView, because from my knowledge, TripView is doesn't have the walking directions.
Are you sure?
I think so.
I use it. I use it for that.
But I know that TripView provides you with information about how many people are on the train or how many people are on the bus, which is also quite important. But I know that it's very easy to use both of these apps in conjunction.
Mm.
Yeah. So for TripView, is there like a paid version or is it completely free?
No, so there's, as I understand it, because I've used the paid version for quite some time, it's not very expensive, by the way, but there is a light version.
What are the differences between the two?
The light version, you know what? I haven't used the light version for years, so you've caught me out here.
Well, from what I remember, I think the light version was that you couldn't save the trips on the app, so once you exited
that makes sense. That's
they
right.
delete it.
That's exactly what.
And for the paid version, you can actually save the trips and you can actually organize it into folders, which is very easy. So, how far does like the transport system spread throughout New South Wales? Does it go all the way into the outback, or?
So the transport system. So the trains generally go out to most regional areas up the coast. Generally, if you want to go inland, there are some services, but primarily there's a lot of bus services that you use.
Thank you.
Or you can also fly. I mean, but that's not public transport.
No. How cheap is the transport here? Or are there any discounts for international students when they come to Australia?
Look, that's a really sad point. There are no international student discounts or concessions for travel cards, which is quite difficult, and I don't understand why, but that's just the way it is.
Are there perhaps any other discounts that are applicable, perhaps on certain days where the transport is a bit cheaper? Or?
Look, it depends with the transport, it depends what time you go. So the New South Wales, or the Sydney transport at least, you can save money by choosing to go in a non-peak time. If you go in a peak time, it can get a bit more expensive. Like say if you are going from Sydney to Parramatta, sometimes it might only cost you $3. Sometimes it'll cost you $10.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what time you choose to go.
So,
but unfortunately for international students, there's no concession card, and there's not much we can do about that.
okay, thank you for that. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about to the viewers? Perhaps is it safe for international students to come to Sydney?
Look, Australia's been, as I understand it, has been ranked as one of the safest international student destinations in the world. We take international students' safety very seriously. We even have legislation which is world leading in respect of looking after international students' rights. So Australia can be very safe, but like anywhere, you need to you need to exercise caution and wisdom. So, for instance, if you wouldn't walk through a park late at night on your own back home, don't do it here, because we probably don't do that either. A lot of the people watching will be leaving home for the first time, so it's just something to bear in mind, is that it's an exciting time, it's great, but just be smart. and don't assume that the things that you wouldn't do, don't do things here just because you're away from home that you wouldn't do at home.
Okay, thank you so much.
No worries, thank you. I think we've gone over time, but that was a great chat.
Thank you, so was. So just a reminder that if you had any more questions, just send it in to us, or you can comment on the live stream itself. And thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Yes. We're just going to take a 10-minute break very quickly. Go and get a drink of water or grab a bite to eat. We'll be back very shortly. Thank you.